Cbeebies Bedtime Story.
What do you think, Hoot? Oh, hello. I'm Sally. I was just asking Hoot if he was thinking about flying off for a nighttime adventure, but I think he's going to stay with me for tonight's story. It's all about a bird who's learning how to fly. The story is called George Flies South and is by Simon James. The leaves on the trees were turning brown. Winter was coming and lots of birds were heading south. It was time for George to learn to fly. "Are you ready, George?" said his mum. "Not quite," said George. "I might fall. I think I like my nest best. Will you get some worms, Mum? I'll stay here." And whilst George waited, a strong gust of wind swept through the park. It tore through the branches, scattering the leaves everywhere, and George's nest wobbled and lifted into the air. "Mum," said George, "Mum, look at me. I'm flying. Whee!" But George's mum was too far away and she couldn't hear him calling. When she flew back, George and his nest were gone. "George! George!" she cried. "Where are you?" "I'm here, Mum," called George. "I flew down in my nest." And then, without warning, George and his nest were on the move again. "Am I going south, Mum?" asked George. "Hold on!" shouted his mum. "I'm coming!" But George couldn't hold on and took off into the air. "Look at me, Mum, look at me," said George. "I'm flying again." "You can't stay here, George," said his mum. "You've got to leave your nest. Try to flap your wings." George tried. "Try harder." "What are we going to do, Mum?" Much later, the boat stopped and George was lifted up, up, up into the air. "Don't move, George," said his mum. George looked down. He was glad he still had his nest. "Don't worry," said his mum. "We'll try again tomorrow." George curled up and fell fast asleep. The next morning, George woke with a start. "Look out, George!" shouted his mum. Crack! The cat landed and George's nest began to fall. "Don't worry, Mum, I'm all right," shouted George. Down, down, down he fell. Twig by twig, the nest fell apart until only George was left. "Mum!" cried George. "I've lost my nest." "George, you have to flap your wings," shouted his mum. "Now it's time." George tried really hard. "You can do it," said his mum. "I'm trying," said George. And with a deep breath and a huge beat of his wings, George flew. "I knew you could do it, George," said his mum. "I'm ready to fly south now," said George. "Let's go. I hope there's lots of worms." That story was called George Flies South. I wonder what it would be like to fly, soaring high up into the sky. But right now it's time for you to close your eyes and snuggle up tight. And I'll see you soon for another bedtime story. Sweet dreams.